Hey guys, no video for our crime and emergency services in Japan playlist. We don't have a lot of first-hand experience of the Japanese justice system due to some good decision making and great care being taken, we're happy to say. However, it's obviously in the media fairly regularly, and in particular the last couple of weeks we've seen a bit talked about a couple of different subjects. So a couple of things that people might find interesting is, one is that the system is supposed to be an adversarial system. So when Japan modernized, they brought in the adversarial justice system, which is sort of like a fairly standard Western one, where the prosecutor and the police charge the person with something, and then the defense defend them, and there's an impartial judge or judges listening to both sides, and then they decide what the real story is. That's pretty much what the system's designed to be like. There's also often a panel of judges that often include lay people, so just average people, which is sort of similar to the jury system in some ways. So that's the way the system's designed. However, the reality is that usually the system is, the judge's position is more inquisitive. So the judge questions witnesses, and it's sort of like the judge is trying to get to the bottom of the story and to find out what the real story is. So there is a defense, there's a defense lawyer or lawyers who are defending the defendant, and there is a prosecutor, but the prosecutor tends to work with the judge. So that's a little bit different, isn't it? So it's also quite famous. We see it in the international media often when they talk about the fact that Japan has a 99% conviction rate, which is often reported in the media, international media, because they find that a little bit interesting. So that might not be as scary as it sounds. So 99% conviction rate means that if you are charged with an offence in Japan and you go before a court, then there's a 99% chance that you'll be found guilty, right? Which sounds pretty scary, doesn't it? And it sort of is. Obviously, if you're charged with something, it's going to be very scary. However, what does tend to influence that number a little bit is the fact that usually in Japan, prosecutors won't actually bring charges against somebody unless they're really convinced that they're going to get a conviction, that they have enough evidence for a conviction. So from that point of view, it probably means that people who aren't guilty are probably usually released, or if there's not enough evidence against them, that they're usually released and not charged. The other part of that, and we've talked about this in previous videos where we talked about Japanese jails, the other part of that, of course, is you can be held without charge in Japan for something like 28 days while they investigate, right? So without charge, the police can take you into custody, put you in jail, and usually what they will do is they will interrogate people, old style interrogations, wanting a confession. And of course, particularly with minor crime, what can happen is a person can feel like they're going to be in jail forever, and they'll give them a conviction on the understanding that after they're convicted, they're only going to get a short sentence anyway, which might end up being 28 days or something like that. So for minor offences, often people will confess, being aware of the fact that they could be kept. Because what happens is they can actually keep you in custody without charge for 28 days, and then while they're investigating your crime, they say, and then they can, if they add another charge, they can keep you for another 28 days while they investigate that charge. Or if they change the charge, what they can do is decide, okay, we'll drop that charge, we won't charge you with that, we'll charge you with something else, and then keep you for another 28 days while they investigate that charge or that alleged offence. So yeah, all around a fairly scary sort of system. And then obviously the way it works is a lot comes down to that judge, obviously, or judges. So a lot comes down to the judge or judges in the end, which sort of does in other systems too. But of course, in other systems, there's an appeal process, and there's also that adversarial style where, you know, the judge is supposed to be impartial, listening to both sides. So obviously a degree of scariness to this all, as you can imagine. Then what actually prompted this video was there was a story in the media over the last few weeks. Some of you might remember 20 years ago, there was a sarin gas attack in Tokyo. There was a religious sect of extreme crazy people who did a gas attack, released sarin gas, a deadly gas, in the Tokyo subway system and killed people, and killed lots of people. And some of the people who committed that offence 20 years ago have been in jail ever since, sentenced to death, because of course there still has the death penalty in Japan, sentenced to death, but they've been waiting 20 years for the death sentence to be carried out. So there is actually an appeals process in Japan which had been exhausted, and then they're just waiting to be sentenced to death. And the reason this was in the news the last few weeks is that there is one judge apparently. Now again, none of this is first hand, right? We're not directly involved in the Japanese legal system, so none of this is first hand. All of this is just what we've seen reported. So what was reported was that there is a judge who can approve the carrying out of the death sentence. So he can say, okay, carry out the death sentence on this person, next Tuesday, right, at 10 o'clock, and it'll happen, right? Usually by hanging, incidentally, by the way. And interestingly, that apparently recently they've been executing people that have been waiting for years. So some of these guys have been waiting 20 years, and then the last few weeks they've been saying, right, let's execute these people. And what we saw in the media was that it's being said that the reason is that they don't want to be doing this next year, because next year is the Tokyo Olympics. And they're really aware, they're super aware of the world's media. There's been a lot of stories about this. There's a funny one recently that some of the convenience stores have started. Actually, one of the prefectural governments might have brought in a new law about the sort of magazines that can be out in the convenience stores, because we've showed you that before. There's some pretty sus magazines on the racks of the convenience stores with young girls dressed in school uniforms and upskirt stuff and all sorts of really sus stuff that just wouldn't be acceptable outside Japan. And one of the prefectural governments brought in a law recently to ban some of this stuff. And it's a really funny thing. It gives us the impression of look out, like some teenage boys with some sus magazines, and look out, mum and dad are coming, and hiding the magazines under the coffee table or under the bed or something. It's a little bit like that. Oh, look out, visitors are coming. Quick, hide the sus porn, right? Hide the sus magazines. Let's hide them before the visitors get here. And there is sort of an undertone of that. There's been a lot of talk about this, that before the 2020 Olympics we need to do this. And before the 2020 Olympics, we need to do this and tidy up this and get rid of that and hide that and put that under the bed and hide that under the coffee table. And there's a bit of sort of that vibe going on. And the death sentence thing's one of those, because the Japanese government's well aware of the fact that a lot of other people from other countries are against the death penalty, and a lot of Japanese people are too, incidentally. There is a strong protest group in Japan that protest against the death penalty. There are a lot of Japanese people who are against it as well. However, there are a lot of Japanese people that are all for it. So it's still being carried out. So the interesting thing is that this one judge, apparently, again, this is what's being reported, is this one judge has said, okay, and he started signing off on all these execution documents to have all these people executed this year, so that they're all executed. And the idea is that next year, 2020, when the Olympics are on and the world's media are here, that they won't do any executions, that anybody that's on death row will just have to wait, and that they won't be able to be killed during 2020, so that it's not in the media and doesn't get picked up by the world media. So isn't that interesting? It's sort of it's a little bit scary. I mean, a lot of other systems are similar, depending on which other countries you look at. There are some other countries that have some fairly scary justice systems as well. I'm talking about Western ones. There's some pretty scary ones as well, aren't there? That, you hear all sorts of stories. But this one, you know, there's a few things there. It seems to be there's a lot of power in the hands of just a few individuals, and that it's really up to them, the fate of the defendants, you know, and that's fairly scary, isn't it? I mean, of course, you know, if you come to Japan, you don't commit any offences, then this shouldn't be a problem for you, should it? And that was advice we gave in a video about 10 years ago we made about the prison system in Japan, about how serious it is. And we made a video about that about 10 years ago, and the advice in that was don't commit any offences in Japan, because if you don't commit any offences, none of this will be an issue, of course. So the fear would be, however, that you really wouldn't want to have, I mean, the fact is that there are, as in every country, there are people who discriminate against foreigners, as there are in every country, you know, and the fear would be that you'd have to be unlucky if you happen to have some police who had a dislike of foreigners, who wanted to make an example of you, or a prosecutor that felt the same, and a judge that felt the same. It would be a fairly scary situation to be in, wouldn't it? Where they'd all be deciding that they make an example of you to convince the other foreigners not to misbehave in Japan. Would be a fairly scary sort of prospect, wouldn't it? So, yeah, sort of interesting, and sort of highlighted to the ultimate degree by that, you know, by that report that the one judge was saying, okay, let's tidy up death row, and let's put all these people to death now, get it done now, so we don't have to do any next year when the world's media is here. So a little bit scary, isn't it? It's more scary not directly as us as individuals, because if we don't commit offences it shouldn't be an issue, should it? But it's sort of scary from what could happen to people, couldn't it? What could happen to other people, and how scary it must be to be in the hands of one person basically deciding what's going to happen to you. Would be fairly scary, wouldn't it? Particularly if you happen to be a foreigner and that person happened to not like foreigners. That'd be fairly scary. So from that point of view. But yeah, but this tidy up before the Tokyo Olympics is another topic that we'll probably be talking about a bit. It's come up a little bit in other videos about some of these things that are being done in preparation for the Tokyo Olympics, and some of them are happening and some of them are failing. You know, the one that we talked about recently was the English. They talked about that a lot when they first got the Olympics right. We're going to get the English up to standard before 2020. And of course we knew that wasn't going to happen. You can't wave a magic wand and have everybody be proficient at English without changing the way it's taught and the way it's learnt in Japan. So we knew that wasn't going to happen, and of course it hasn't. 2019, we've only got a year left. Still nobody can speak English, pretty much. So anyway, yeah, that's the topic. The justice system and the death penalty in Japan. I mean, obviously there's a lot more to it than this, and there's a lot of people we know would be much more qualified than us to speak about it. But this is just, again, with all our videos, it's just what we see and what we hear, and this is the stuff that we see and we hear in the media here in Japan. And of course, something a little bit scary too about all this is that most countries, probably criminals don't get a lot of sympathy, but probably Japan is even more so, because people in Japan who don't do the right thing, who don't follow don't do what they're supposed to do and don't follow the group, usually receive zero sympathy. And so criminals are sort of like one step further than that. So that's why, you know, any criminal who does anything in Japan doesn't usually get any sympathy or any sort of compassion at all, usually. The system's fairly ruthless on anybody that steps outside the law. So yeah, so again, just finishing the best way to finish this video is if you come to Japan, don't break any rules would be the way to go. And because we've talked about this before in other videos, people often, oh, you need to get involved in this and you need to stand up for this or stand up for that, or you need to, you know, we talked about recently about bullying in Japan, and you know, you need to stand up and do something about it. And, I mean, this is why the advice that we've consistently given in the how-to videos over the years has been just to stay out of any dramas, just don't get involved, because you really wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of this. You know, and we've talked about this before, if you get in a fight with a Japanese person, you know, it's just the reality is that you're going to be disadvantaged when it comes to it being investigated, and there's an immediate assumption if there's any conflict between a foreigner and a Japanese person, there's an immediate assumption that it's the foreigner's fault. And there'll be some people, no doubt, that'll stand up, oh, that's not fair, that's not right. Well, yeah, that's true, that is true, but it's the reality. And that, you know, it'd be a terrible situation to be in, to have been in some sort of altercation, physical altercation with a Japanese person, and having it being investigated would be a scary, scary situation. Because there'd be an assumption by everybody involved that it was your fault because the foreigners come here and made trouble. Ah, foreigner, right, of course, we've heard that. We've actually heard that when there is a report of a foreigner being involved in something bad, you know, some sort of crime or something. Moshiron, tashikani, of course, you'll hear them say, different people say, you know, of course, the foreigner, of course. And that'd be terrible, wouldn't it? You know, and we've seen this, we've talked about examples before, and there's always someone who says, you should stand up and you should fight and you should protect people and you should do this and you should do that, you know, and what inevitably happens, and it's happened here before, you know, there'll be a couple of Japanese people who are having some sort of drama, the foreigner steps in to be the white knight and to somehow, you know, fix everything, and then both the Japanese people turn on the foreigner and call the police and say, this guy, who we don't know, has just come along and started getting physical with us. And the foreigner says, but I was defending him from her or her from him, or I was, you know, trying to save the person who was being bullied. And yeah, nobody's going to get that. Nobody's going to see it that way. They're just going to see that two Japanese people were minding their own business, and along came this foreigner and started to get physical with them, which is against the law. And once you start to get on the wrong side of the law, it's a really bad place to be. It'll result in you probably getting convicted of something and maybe going to jail and then being deported, because if you commit any offences in Japan, straight away your visa's void and you'll be thrown out. So that's why, you know, there's always people that really object to us saying this, just stay out of it, don't get involved, don't break any laws. There's always someone that you got to stand up for what's right. Well, those people can, if they want to come to Japan and fight the fight and protest and fight people and do whatever they think is the way to go, then they can do that. But our advice is don't do it, because it'll probably end badly for you, unfortunately. So anyway, there it was. It's going to go and have lunch on the train line here. More videos coming soon.